the programming I received, is being aggressive, be hypersexual, and really, um, some of the things that I learned within my subculture, whereas alcohol consumption and other drugs was heavy for Black men, so therefore that's was part of the subculture that I learned that it was okay to drink a bunch of liquor and chase women and and to really be aggressive and be physically abusive and violent, when going out and having drinks. So there's a lot of messages I receive within my subculture, but also within the larger Western world culture as well too. That we had to be tough, even stoic, not show emotions and feelings. And even growing up in my household, you know, the only emotion that I felt safe enough to express was anger.
Yep. Welcome to the Cardinal Way for Men. And my name is Ed Cardinal, and this is the Next Man Up transformational, candid conversations with men. And it's a pleasure to have Kelvin on with me. And I've been following Kelvin for quite a few years, actually, through social media. I found out about him through someone I know who's involved in the sound healing world in Connecticut, and he's the one that told me about you, Kelvin. And so I kind of connected through social media, and then also saw that you were very involved with in working with men, and in particular men in recovery. So
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to learning more about how you're helping men, and also more about the sound healing. So welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you so much, Ed, for this opportunity to be here with each and every one of you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So
Awesome.
thank you so much again. Thank
Yeah,
you.
oh, you're welcome. So let's talk about sound healing. How long have you been involved in that, and what is sound healing?
Yeah, very good question. I learned from one of my teachers, Zakiah Blackburn, is that sound healing is the intentional use of sound to create a vibrational environment, which becomes the catalyst for our healing in the mental, emotional, spiritual, as well as physical aspects of our being. So, during a sound healing session, I use, crystal singing bowls, Himalayan bowls, I have gongs, I have ocean drums, tinctures, chimes, and different other healing tools to help people to activate and stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, also known as the relaxation response, to help them calm their minds, relax their bodies, to feel their emotions, and to nourish their souls. And the meditative sounds that I use during a sound healing session, it promotes healing from chronic stress, muscle tension, physical pain that we feel in our bodies, feelings of anxiety, depression, post traumatic stress, sleep issues, and different other stress related chronic health conditions that we experience in our lives. And through the process of entrainment, when we listen to the sounds and train with the sounds, the vibrations, and tones and frequencies from all the different healing instruments that I utilize, it takes us from the waking state, which in scientific terms is known as the beta state of brainwave activities or states of consciousness. And through that active listening and the process of entrainment, it takes us from the awakened state of beta down to an alpha state, which is, a very calm and relaxed state. And some people are during a sound healing session, when they enter that theta state, they go into that deeper meditative state. And it's in that theta state, in that delta state, that our minds and bodies are relaxed. And when we're in a relaxed state, our bodies have a natural, innate ability to heal itself. So, sound healing is a great, powerful tool, holistic healing modality to help us to rejuvenate ourselves, also relax us, and also could be the catalyst for transformation and healing as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I know I've done some research about sound healing. Particularly, I built my own hand drum.
Oh,
I
yes.
use that in my body work. I'm a Thai body work practitioner, and I have been for a long time. And so, yeah, I know that there's a certain beat of the drum that
Mhm.
creates that experience that you're talking about, where you're in that theta state. You're also more open to change, to suggestibility. So, if you're talking to someone through an experience like that, you can really uh, affect change because they're more open to it in that state.
So true. Yeah. When we get into that theta state of brainwave activities, that's when we could tap into our creativity. We could tap into that flow state, but I also believe we tap into that subconscious realm where I believe all of our power is really at. All those, programming to receive from our caregivers, from our culture, all these programmings that we receive, all these habitual patterns and behaviors is stored in our subconscious awareness. And when we can, work in the subconscious and really make some sustainable changes and reprogramming, that's where I believe that we could really make some really healthy and sustainable changes that really resonate with our greater good.
Mm, that's a great segue into my next question, and that is about the programming that we receive culturally. I just had a guest on last week, and he's of Jamaican descent, and we talked about what were the messages that you received from culturally about what it means to be a man, and every culture is different in that way. And so for you, what were some of the messages that you received about what it means to be a man?
Yeah, yeah. I grew up in my culture. I'm African American, and my parents was born here in the United States in this country, but in the southern states of South Carolina. My parents were born so, and they grew up in a very segregated time. A lot of trauma, a lot of pain, a lot of intergenerational trauma that my parents experienced, and how that trauma been passed down to me. And my father was a role model for me, and he still is really. He's 88 years old, still living. And for him to be the man that he is today and going through so much trauma and pain in a segregated South, I really, really commend that. And some of the messages that I've learned, from him and from our culture and our society is, you know, we, we get these perceptions of men, and we have to be, physically fit. We got to be strong. We got to be resilient, and we got to be, money makers. We got to be successful. All these different stories that our culture program us to believe. But one of the things that I believe is that, as a man, my father always taught us what it is to be a provider, to be a protector, to show that strength and resilience. There's nothing wrong with that, but also create a safe space for us to have conversations. And it wasn't until his later years that we was able to have these safe spaces to have conversations. But I grew up with four older brothers and him, and my dad, he ruled with an iron fist, so to speak. And but he also was there for us because many of my friends, particularly my black friends, their fathers wasn't around because they either was incarcerated, they were addicted to alcohol and other drugs, or they just wasn't around. And my father was there, was married to my mother for over 56 years until she passed away from Alzheimer's. But he showed us what it is to be a provider. He held my mother's hand to her very last breath. He showed us how to be a protector, and the love that he showed to me and my four other brothers and to my mom.
Mhm.
That's some of the messages that I received, but really watching him, and being that role model for us and my family, it was very special for us.
Mhm. Sounds like an amazing man, your father is, and it's great that he's still around and you still can
Yeah,
spend some time with him.
yes.
It's awesome. Growing up in our culture,
Hmm.
what were some of the messages that you received about what it means to be a man? Maybe through the media, through
Hmm.
school. Um, how did that impact you?
Yeah. For me, again, I have to really put it in context as, for me, I'm a cis heterosexual black male, able-bodied male. So from my point of perspective, it was always the programming I received, is being aggressive, be hypersexual, and really, um, some of the things that I learned within my subculture, whereas alcohol consumption and other drugs was heavy for black men, so therefore that's was part of the subculture that I learned that, it was okay to drink a bunch of liquor and chase women and and to really be aggressive and be physically abusive and violent, when going out and having drinks. So there's a lot of messages I receive within my subculture, but also within the larger Western world culture as well too. That we had to be tough, even stoic, not show emotions and feelings. And even growing up in my household, you know, the only emotion that I felt safe enough to express was anger.
Yep.
And anger quickly turned to rage under the influence of alcohol and other drugs, and that rage got me into a lot of trouble, But growing up in my household, we fought physically a lot, me and my four older brothers, and that was like the norm, you know. Once I got of age, my brother and I we used to all go heavy, drinking, and always going to bars and clubs and womanizing over women. So that was part of the culture I learned of what it was to be a man. And growing up now, looking at it, I sense a little unhealthiness in that dynamic, but it was the norm for me at that particular time.
Mhm. When did that awareness become come to you, and what changed it for you?
I think for me is when I went to prison,
Mhm.
for the fourth time in my life. And I never forget being in that jail cell. Think about the poor choices I made under the influence of alcohol and other drugs. Still detoxing from the night before, from alcohol, from the marijuana, from the heroin, the cocaine, the Klonopins, the prescription opioids. I had a lot of drugs in my system, and detoxing in the jail cell, it was very, very heavy for me. And I thought about my daughter, and all the pain and hurt that I'm causing in her life, and also my other family members as well too, but my daughter in particular came to my mind. And you know it got to the point where I know that something needed to change. That old saying, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And right then, my daughter Tatiana, she was my inspiration for me to find the inner motivation to really change my life around for the better, because I wanted to be the man, the father that my daughter could look up to and be proud of. So while in prison, I took advantage of all the programs that was available while I was incarcerated. And the program that really helped me the most was a drug treatment program in prison. I was addicted to alcohol and other drugs for many, many years. And, I made a lot of poor choices under the influence of it. And I was really ready to make some sustainable changes in my life and begin the healing process for me. And being in this drug treatment program and enter into recovery, because recovery for me gave me the framework of really building a healthier lifestyle of sobriety, and being in that drug treatment program in prison, I was able to learn about myself, my relationship to alcohol and other drugs, and how it impacted me mentally, how it impacted me physically, and I believe how it impacted me spiritually as well too. And that's where I also learned other tools to help me to deal with some of the root causes of my experiences with addiction. So that's where I learned about sound healing and yoga and meditation, creative expressive arts like poetry and journaling. And I had a lot of misconceptions about these practices, these practices at first. And to be quite frank, I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. I didn't see cis black men, practicing yoga,
Right,
meditation,
right.
and I didn't feel comfortable doing it in prison as well too, because us men, we wore a lot of masks while in prison, so there, and for me and many people in the beginning, doing practices like yoga, meditation, sound healing, that was considered like feminine
Mhm.
practices to do. So I didn't feel comfortable doing it at first. But I know the things I was doing prior to going to prison wasn't working for me no more. So I had to try something new and different. And by stepping out of my comfort zone and utilizing practices like yoga, meditation, and sound healing, and allow that to be a vehicle for me to go within, because I believe that true sustainable healing begins with inside of ourselves. And I was able to find that sense of calmness, inner peace, even being in a very hostile and restrictive environment such as prison. But most importantly, I was able to understand the root causes of my experiences with addiction. And from that lived experience, I realized that it was the unhealed emotional pain that I experienced in my life, the unprocessed trauma that I experienced that went all the way back to childhood for me, but also adolescent and as well as adulthood trauma, as well as all the toxic chronic stress. For me, all of that was at the root of my addiction. So for many years, I reached for something outside of myself to find that sense of relief from that distress. And for me, I found it in alcohol and other drugs, and it worked for a while until it didn't work. And I got caught up in that very vicious cycle of addiction. So that experience being in prison and really enter into recovery, allow recovery to be that framework for me to create a healthy lifestyle, that allowed me to really shift the way I see myself, the world, and the people in it. And I was able to tap into my vulnerability, able to tap into my emotions more. I was able to really, have heartfelt conversations with other men. And I'd never forget being in prison and being in a drug treatment program in prison. And, the counselor asked us in a group, can we be intimate with other men? And, when I thought about intimacy, I connected with sex, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And just just the responses that I got from the other, everybody was like, "Oh no," what I mean? This reaction, But once we understood what intimacy really, really meant, you know what I mean, when I was able to have conversation and be vulnerable to other men, it felt safe enough to do that. That really helped me to kind of like just, okay, look at intimacy in a different way, look at vulnerability in a different way. And I was able to open up to men and to really have deep, heartfelt conversations on a platonic level and on a brother to brother level, so to speak, a man to man level, which was very unfamiliar for me for a while. But as until I entered recovery and understand what that really means and how I was able to really start looking at masculinity and manhood in a different way.
How old was your daughter when you went to prison for the last time and made those changes?
She was about like
Yeah.
yeah, 10 years old, yeah. And I took a fatherhood program while I was in program as well too to really, build a healthier relationship with my daughter when I was, paroled home. And I never forget the day that she came to visit me. And um, at the fatherhood graduation, we was able to have contact with our visitors. And my daughter, she came and, she was talking a mile a minute and just like kind of filling me in with everything that she was going on in her life. And, that really touched me because, you know, being in prison, we have these thoughts and these attitudes, and we internalize um, the shame and guilt, that often happens when we're incarcerated. But my daughter looked past all that, and she was really seen, was happy to see her father, and I was able to see that still that twinkle in her eye for her father, having that father love still there, regardless of all the poor choices I made in my life. So that really helped me to kind of really build that bond with her once I was able to be paroled home and really build a healthy relationship with her. And we still have this healthy relationship to this day.
Mhm.
But it was for me enter into recovery and started looking at life differently. That really helped me to kind of
Hmm.
like open up more.
So how long have you been clean and sober, Kelvin?
I've been sober actually be 15 years, um, 15 years in March.
Congratulations.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's this month. Oh no, wait a
yeah,
minute. Where do we? No, we're not in February. March should be Friday. So yeah, next month.
yeah,
Coming up
yeah.
soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited, to to be able to kind of celebrate that milestone,
Yes.
and I celebrated with her and the rest of my family and loved ones and my recovery community, and you know, I learned that we need each other. We're wired for connection and community, and I didn't become sober for 15 years by myself. It was because, her motivation and inspiration that allowed me to find that inner motivation to change my life around my family, my loved ones, my partner, my recovery community, my sober friends. All these people really helped me to sustain my recovery for over 14 years now. So I'm so grateful for that. And, that day I will celebrate with all of them in mind, because I didn't do this alone.
Right.
It takes a community.
Absolutely. We never do.
Yeah.
So what did you do when you got out to support your recovery? You talked about yoga, sound healing, meditation. You added those components to your recovery.
Yeah.
And
Once I got discharged from prison, paroled, and I went back to the community, back home, and I was excited, because this was my first time to really live a life sober, because this is how I bonded with my brothers, by drinking and doing other drugs. This is how I bonded with my friends that I knew for 20 plus years by drinking and doing drugs. So I was excited to live this new lifestyle of recovery, but I was also very nervous as well too, because this is all very new and this is people that I loved, and it might sound cliche, but people, places, and things, I had to like change all of that, and I had to learn to love a lot of friends and family from a distance, and I had to learn to really rebuild healthy relationship with other people in my life that had my best interest at heart. Was kind of going on a very similar path as well, for me. So I was excited, and I connected to different people that were sober as well too, different sober communities, and I really incorporate mind body holistic practices such as yoga, such as meditation, such as sound healing, all these different practices that will help me to do the inner work that I needed to do in order to find freedom, for over 14 years now, but also help me to keep my mindset on a sober path, And I, I personally could say that, as time went by, um, for me, having a desire to drink or do drugs, it got easier for me, Um, and once I built that community and different people that I could connect with that didn't associate with alcohol and other drugs, it really was helpful for me to really, because I still like to be social, I still like to connect with other people, but I had to learn how to do it in a very sober way,
Mhm.
and it was a path. And the thing that I learned as well too, that I had to do it one day at a time, and just really continue to do it for, it's been one day at a time for over 14 years now.
Right.
And that's the key to keep me grounded, and to keep it green for me.
Right. Now, were you involved and are you still involved in 12-step recovery program?
For me, um, and I'm just gonna be honest,
Mhm.
12 steps was the foundation of my sobriety,
Mhm.
and I owe it that, and I really appreciate the foundation, especially when I was in prison. We ran a lot of 12 step meetings. When I was in a drug treatment program, I was a peer mentor in the drug treatment program in prison. So when the counselors go home, we're there 24/7. So we was able to run 12 step meetings, and I was able to do 12 steps, um, do the steps while I was incarcerated. And we have outside people come in for the larger 12 step meetings. And it really helped me to kind of like understand what this lifestyle was all about, the sober lifestyle, recovery lifestyle. But once I got out, it was a different dynamics for me. And, um, for me, 12 step was designed for, within mind with heterosexual, able-bodied white men. So therefore, and anybody outside of that is considered other. And I felt I didn't feel comfortable when I started going to the meetings in the communities. When I was in prison, you know, it was us, running the meetings and everything. So it was a different dynamics, and I didn't feel as welcome, when I started going into 12-step communities, in my neighborhood. And that's when I start getting more deeper into these holistic practices, whereas these practices would help me to sustain um, my sobriety and my recovery. Then it got to the point where, um, I started having a problem with standing up and saying, my name is Kelvin, I'm an addict and I'm an alcoholic, even by definition, I haven't consumed alcohol or any other drug for a couple of years now. And I do understand why people say it, to understand that the relationship to alcohol and other drugs is very toxic and unhealthy, but for me, understanding that, by really understanding and learning about these holistic practices, any word that I use after I am, we manifest in our life. So therefore, if I'm standing up and saying my name is Kelvin, I am an addict or alcoholic, I'm programming my subconscious mind to think as an alcoholic, programming to be an alcoholic or addict. So when I get stressed out, I get overwhelmed, when things hit the fan, I'm gonna do what addicts and alcoholics do. I'm gonna use, I'm gonna consume, and that's not to take away the impact that alcohol and other drugs had on my life, because I was very much addicted to alcohol and other drugs. But I do believe that language matters when we describe these human experiences. And I do believe that addiction is a human experience, not a human identity. Because behind the so-called addict, behind the so-called alcoholic, is a human being that experienced a significant amount of trauma, emotional distress, and toxic chronic stress. And we're just looking for a sense of relief from that distress. And we live in a culture, in a society that kind of conditions us to reach for something outside of ourselves when we're dealing with any type of pain, whether it's a physical pain or emotional pain. As a kid growing up, if I ever had a toothache or a headache, I was conditioned to reach for aspirin, Tylenol, Excedrin, what have you. And I use a physical painkiller, a legitimate physical painkiller, such as heroin, opioids, Percocets, all these different opioids to deal with emotional pain, and these are physical painkillers, and I used it to deal with that emotional pain, and it worked for a while for me until it didn't work. So,
Mhm.
I really had to um, start to look at life from a different perspective, and these holistic practices allowed me to see things from a totally different perspective that was beyond the 12-step programming that we receive
Mhm.
in our
Yeah,
community.
yeah, you and I think very similarly. I've been sober for 34 years now,
Oh, that's
and
what's up. Yes.
yeah, I don't know if you knew that about me, but
No. Yeah.
so I was, heavily involved in 12-step recovery for probably about 5 years,
Hmm.
and it, as you said, it provided a great foundation for me.
Yeah.
But I'm more holistic oriented like you. So my recovery took me in some of those same directions that yours did. I got involved in yoga, and this is the early 90s. And I was, not a lot of people were doing yoga at the time, and not a lot of men were doing yoga at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
And then, later meditation came to me. I got involved in another amazing life-changing thing I got involved in is a men's group.
Yes.
And that was really beneficial in learning how to build bonds and be vulnerable in a safe setting with other men, which, we weren't
Yes.
conditioned to do. It was a sign of
That's right.
weakness.
Hmm.
So that was another part of my recovery. And then also, good nutrition and what I feed my mind, like you said, I'm listening to positive, inspirational, content every day,
Hmm.
a breathing practice. So yeah, my recovery, like you, took me in a more holistic path. Uh,
Yeah.
but but that's not to take away from the foundation of AA in the beginning that kind of set me up for success.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Ah, thank you for sharing that, Ed. I didn't know that, man. That's what's
yeah.
up. Congratulations, to you as well too. And I'm glad we share that, that bond together, and being sober, in our lives. And, and sometimes I hesitate to kind of share my truth because of the fact that, 12 step can help so many people, and it is my foundation, and for those that 12 step works for them, good for them. Continue to do that. And
Right,
but I only can speak my truth and how I experienced it as well too. And I don't want to take nobody away from that, but this is our truth,
right,
what I mean? And I felt safe enough to speak that truth to you and to your audience. So,
right,
but thank you
right.
so much for sharing that,
Oh,
man.
yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, yeah. I don't like you. I don't want to diminish the impact of AA on my sobriety and so many people. I agree.
Yeah.
But I just spoke about this. My concern with some of the men that I saw was that they were abstaining from alcohol, they were attending meetings, but they weren't getting better. Recovery, in my opinion, is so much more than that, and it is a
Yeah.
holistic approach. I shared. I saw one day early in my sobriety, I was driving by this house, and I saw a man I knew from AA, and he was well known in the AA community. We had a lot of sobriety, and I thought to myself, "Oh, I should stop by and see him," and I didn't. And he died of a heart attack that night, and
Mm,
it was because he was overweight. He continued to smoke, and just because he had so much recovery time doesn't mean that he was healthy.
that's right.
Um, there's so much more that the health and being sober than abstaining and going to AA meetings. So and not everyone's going to agree with you and I around that.
Yeah.
The I think the thinking with a lot of people in AA is because we left, we're heading towards a drink again,
Right. Yeah.
and that's the only way you can do it. And I totally
Yeah.
disagree with it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
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 yeah. There's so many different pathways
yeah,
to sobriety and recovery now, and we know this, and there's science to prove that now, and practices to kind of show people that there's many pathways, and it's people like us that kind of like talk about other pathways to sobriety that may work for people, but my thing is people don't know it exists until we share it, and people don't know it works for them until they experience for themselves,
right.
and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't work, but just understand that there are many pathways, and finding a pathway that works for us is the key.
Yeah. And you're right. It comes from within. And
Yeah.
the better you get to know yourself, and it's not easy for men to dive deep. It's
Yeah.
challenging to wrestle with some of those demons within
Yeah.
us. And you know, taking a look at that, and then you're gonna get more ideas and intuition about what path is right for you when you
That's
start to
right.
do that work. So for me, it was the more holistic approach, and it's continued to be for over 30 years, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing with my mission and this platform is to help men get healthier. I'd like to save them years of suffering through
Yes.
what I learned through the process.
Yes.
Um, and something I've just recently added to my mission is that my focus is men who are in recovery from alcoholism. So
Hmm.
that's my new push. And it's interesting. My last two guests, um, including you, are men with long time recovery time. The other one was, as I said, was of Jamaican descent, and then you of African descent. So both black men.
Yes. Yes.
So it's you know alcoholism, drug abuse doesn't discriminate.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's all people, all
Yeah.
colors,
That's all of us.
all walks of life.
That's
And
right.
but what we can help, and I know you're doing that work too. You're an advocate for helping people, and I just want to say I want to congratulate you. I was you were recently awarded the Recovery Advocate of the Year.
Thank
I want
you.
you to,
Thank
I
you.
want you to, congratulations. And, I'm sure, and I don't know the work that you're doing, and like you talked more about that, but why did you receive this award? What have you been up to help people?
Yeah, it's just it's been a journey, and part of my goal and mission, just like you, is to really bring more of a holistic approach to addiction recovery. So my advocacy is around how do we empower people, not, excuse me, how do we allow people to see the power that dwells inside of them, to empower themselves to really make some sustainable changes in their life and really take personal responsibility for their health and well-being. And one of the things that really helped me in my sobriety and my recovery is holistic practices. So one of the things that I really advocate for in the recovery community is these holistic practices, because I believe that no one should be denied the benefits of yoga, meditation, sound healing, qigong, based on socioeconomic standing, psychiatric histories, or experiences with addiction. That these mind body practices are for everybody. So a lot of the work that I do, I have my own sound healing practice, but also work with psychiatric hospitals and drug treatment programs here in Connecticut, and really bring more of a holistic approach by incorporating these mind body holistic practices within their system of care. And um, I've been doing that for quite a while now. I've been over since 2014. I've been like really advocating for these mind body holistic practices where I go to conferences and kind of speak on it now. I go to drug treatment programs and mental health facilities and colleges and universities, and I always start off with my story because I think it's important for people to know the why I do what I do. And it's because of my so-called negative experiences that I went through in my life by being addicted to alcohol and other drugs, going to prison, and how I found freedom behind bars by really going within and really seeing things from a different perspective by learning these mind body practices. Today, I call it divine intervention because I was taken out of my element, I was taken out of my neighborhood and put into a place where I couldn't leave, which was prison, but I also had an opportunity to do the inner work, at least begin doing the inner work I needed to do in order to find freedom from alcohol and other drugs. So that's why I'm so passionate about really bringing these holistic mind body practices into the recovery community because there's so many different pathways of recovery, and now they're starting to recognize that the holistic approach is one of many pathways that people can use to find freedom from alcohol and other drugs. And just really felt good to be highlighted and honored for the work I've been doing here in Connecticut
That's
and
awesome.
beyond.
Big congratulations for
Thank you.
walking and speaking your truth.
Yes, thank
It's
you.
it's so important. You're, I'm sure, a role model for many people in dealing with addiction. Is Men of Color, is that the group that you're kind of most working with, or is it of all people?
It's really all people. So I,
Hmm.
I run a virtual men's group as well for sober men
Hmm.
as well too, which I really really love. And honestly, I'm the facilitator, but I'm the only black man
Hmm.
that's that's there. But the thing that brings us together, is our sobriety. And these are men from all walks of life, and a lot of them are I'll put it this way, they're more financially well off than I am. You know what I mean? And, they talk about different things that I can't really relate to. But one of the things that's so in common is the fact that we all want to be sober. And I introduce them to sound healing, and the responses I get from them is like, thank you for introducing me to sound healing because of that, I did a sound bath in my community, and I really loved it, and just really introducing people to these mind body practices. But I love our conversation because we talk about all kinds of different things that relate to men in our sobriety, in our relationships, whether it's a relationship to our employer or to our coworkers or to our spouses or to our partners or to ourselves. We have these just enriching conversation that benefits all of us. And I really really enjoy it. But I also have a group called Sober Black Men, and this happened organically, whereas other men of color, other black men, we started just going out, for lunch, and just kind of like talking about sobriety and what it looks like for us, because there are some cultural differences, I believe, when we're dealing with sobriety in recovery spaces for Black men. So it just was like a opportunity for us just to kind of like, have these conversations. Then it kind of morphed off to like, okay, what can we do, to really highlight Black men in recovery, or sober Black men? Because one of the things that's a barrier for a lot of people that want to get the support, the help, the healing they need, that they're dealing with addiction, is stigma. And I think one of the ways to kind of like destigmatize things and decrease stigma is to have conversations, open, honest conversations like we're doing right now
Mhm.
about our human experiences that we go through, whether with mental health, addiction, or trauma issues. And having safe spaces for us to do that is so, so important, particularly for men of color.
Mhm.
So we decided we wanted to create, we want to call it a sober healing circle for Black men. So it's gonna be a virtual platform. We have healing circles, or just a support group meeting that we come together virtually, so we can attract more people from the African diaspora, across the world, really, because it's on a virtual platform. But we also understand that representation matters. So therefore, having more people that look like me, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, that's promoting recovery is so important as well too. Having conversations about it. So we want to start a scholarship fund to get more men of color or Black men that's in or seeking recovery, to be trained as recovery coaches, to be trained as peer recovery support specialists, and also be trained in mental health first aid. And how does that look like within our neighborhoods, within our communities? And how do we have safe, brave conversations about this, and really understanding the importance of really having that representation and having these honest conversations, and really having Black men talking to other Black men about these human experiences. I think it's so therapeutic and healing on so many levels.
Right. Well, that's good work, Kelvin. So I'm so proud of the work you're doing,
Thank you.
and for
Thank
your
you, brother.
community. And you know, I lived in Rhode Island for 30 years and moved down south, not far from where your parents are from, South Carolina. I'm in Western
Mhm.
North Carolina, and
Okay.
uh, you know, like you know, racism is deep here.
Hmm.
Uh, you might not see it openly. I mean, I haven't in the short time, but the stories I hear, it's definitely open. But I can feel it.
Yeah.
I can feel it, especially when you get out of Asheville, the city, and head up out into the more rural areas. It's still here.
Oh, yeah.
It's to be honest with you, it's sad for me to get that sense. But with people like you, I'm hoping that that's gonna change
Yeah.
things for the Black community, and
Yeah.
it needs to. It
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
needs to.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, for sharing that. Yeah, because I look at healing and social justice go together, and a lot of the racism that we have here in the Western world is very structural and institutionalized. And this country was founded on racist ideologies.
Mhm.
And I think when people hear racism or different other words, I believe people have a misconception of what that really means. It's like people are judged, and policies is made based on the color of your skin. And the lighter your color skin, the more support, privilege, and resources that are available for people. And the darker your skin, the more oppressed policies and systems that are in place to keep people back. And oftentimes, the people that it doesn't impact is like fish in the water. Fish doesn't even realize it's in water. So a lot of times people that's not being impacted by these oppressive systems, these racist policies, they don't see it, they don't feel it. You know what I mean? But I commend you for having a sensitivity to feel these things and sense these things and understand that it still exists because this is what the country was founded on. And part of the healing work to me is also about social justice as well too. How do we work on a policy level? How do we work in a community level? How do we also work in an individual level? And it takes all that, for people to really create sustainable healing, not only self-healing, but collective community healing as well too. So that's why healing and social justice go hands to hand. And that's kind of like something that I promote in this healing work because we hear about self care oftentimes, but like when it comes to social injustices, particularly that it impacts marginalized, oppressed communities, we got to talk about collective healing as well too, and collective care, and that's one of the things that I like to highlight as well too is like we need community to do this, and we all can find tools and resources within our communities to support one another. But we also have to do it on a legislative level as well too to change some of these policies that impact and oppress particular communities, particularly communities of color.
Mm. So what can I do as a white man down here in the South, on a maybe on a smaller scale for now, because I don't see myself getting involved in politics. But
Yeah.
what can I do to help?
Well, I encourage you to, continue to be mindful of some of the things that you're sensing down
Mhm.
in North Carolina, and being a co-conspirator or ally is important for us. But really, just how do we educate your own community, on your own people that look like you about these racist systems and policies, and speak up about it. When you see something that's unjust, that's has a racist undertone to it or a racist ideology about it, that's when I believe that's the time to speak up,
Yeah.
and just really seeing that this is coming from a programming that we receive within this culture, and how do we unlearn these programs? And we have to see these programs in order to unlearn them. And once we're able to unlearn them, we'll be able to relearn ways that's more just and equitable for all human beings.
Mm. There's an amazing woman that my wife and I just met locally here, and she's close to 90 now, and her roots are
Oh.
like her family roots are, deep here. And
Hmm.
um, she's very involved in a local history museum. And she's a white woman, but
Hmm.
wanted to include the Black history in this region. And
Hmm.
it is part of this museum. And she took us on a personal tour last weekend, and I had a lot of questions about it, and I wanted to know. And she
Yeah,
she was just amazing woman. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter, know, white or black or what. And I was just really proud of her for including that history in this museum.
yeah,
So,
that's
and
beautiful.
one of the things that I've had an opportunity to be friends with some black men here in this area. They're not,
Hmm.
well, one of them is originally from here. He's an older man, a lawyer actually. He was a judge. But I like to ask them their experiences with racism in this area. And that for me,
Hmm.
educating myself about it, I think is important for people who are white like myself, to
Yeah,
educate
yeah,
ourselves and just know what it's like. And um, you know, it helps
yeah.
us. It helps me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, just learning, and I love the fact that I believe that Black history is American history.
Mhm.
And it all it's nice to coexist together. And how Black folks, my ancestors, built this country and made a lot of white families very, very wealthy. Made this country very, very wealthy off the of the free labor that this country got for hundreds of years,
Mhm.
and some of the inventions that was taken away from black folks, some of the contributions that was made within this country by black folks, has all been just forgotten, so therefore how do we highlight a lot of the contribution that black folks has made into this country,
Right,
and it is American history.
right, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is a great conversation. I'm always amazed in what direction it goes, but
Yeah.
it's good sometimes not to have set questions, but just let it flow. And if we're open to the energy of it, it's miraculous things happening, and I'm sure that there's going to be some men who see this and hear this interview are going to be impacted, and that's both of our goals.
That's right.
And yeah,
That's right.
and when you have an intention like that, that it is to serve and to help, it's going to happen. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate this conversation, Kelvin, and I'm really glad I got to have this conversation and to meet you finally after following you for so long, and really admire the work that you're doing on yourself, but also in your community. So keep it up. It's awesome.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, man. And thank you so much for sharing, a little bit of your story and your experience and your sobriety as well, too. That right there, it connects us,
Yes.
Um, you know, there was a saying I heard that, our strengths kind of like impress people, but our so-called weaknesses connect us to people. You know what I mean? By you kind of sharing your journey of sobriety, which I believe is a strength, but it
Right.
also connected me as well too. With you and just like really understanding that this is a friendship based on our lived experience that will I'll love to continue to grow
Yeah.
in this, man. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you and to really share
Awesome.
with your audience. I really, really do.
Yeah, and any way I can support you in your cause, whatever you're doing to support, you know, your your culture, sober men, and whatever it is,
Yeah,
I'm here, whatever you
yeah.
need. Yeah.
I appreciate it, man. We're gonna
All
stay
right.
connected.
Yes, we definitely. I can see that we're gonna continue to have a friendship, and I'm
Yes,
I'm
sir.
I'm
Yes,
happy about that. So,
yes.
so if you enjoyed this video, please check out my video on sound healing, and I will see you there.